Well, I don't know that if you know this about me or not, but I am a huge fan of classic country music and game shows. It's kind of a strange combination, I know, right? But every time I listen to one of those old songs and watch a game show, I'm instantly transported back to my grandparents' house in Norman, Oklahoma. Yes, they lived in Norman. I can't, that's where they chose to live. I don't know, right? But as I would walk through the doors of their house, there'd be country music playing on the radio without fail every single time. And I'm talking about that good old country music, right? The one that from years past, they used to tell a story, right? They used to tell stories about broken hearts and lessons learned. I'm talking about songs from some of the greatest, like Keith Whitley and Randy Travis, right? Well, we would sit there at that dinner table and we'd listen to those songs. We would just talk, and then we would eat some wavy Lay's chips and French onion dip. She always had it on the table when we came. It was always right there, just ready to go. So when I would stay the night or maybe a couple days at their house, we would watch some of those classic game shows on their 21-inch console TV. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, that was a big console TV, right? But we'd watch shows like The Price is Right and Press Your Luck. Well, as I read the story of Jacob that we're going to be covering today, I was reminded of both an old classic country song and a game show. Now, we're going to get to the story of Jacob here in just a minute, but I want to take just a moment to take you on a journey inside my mind. It's kind of scary, right? I know, that's kind of scary. You see, the song in which that I was reminded of begins like this. And as soon as you know it, this is audience participation. As soon as you know the song that I'm talking about, I want you to shout out the title of it, okay? It starts like this. See if I can get it right. On a warm summer's evening, on a train bound for nowhere. What? The Gambler. Thank you. I didn't want to go much farther than that. But yeah, it's The Gambler by Kenny Rogers, right? And I actually had some more of the verses there just to make sure but thank you for stopping me right there, okay? But that's the part that came to my mind in reference to Jacob is the beginning of the chorus. And you know what I'm talking about, right? So don't leave me hanging, sing it with me, all right? You gotta know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, and know when to run. All right, we're gonna stop right there, okay? And now you know why they don't let me in the choir or the band. Thank you. That's right there. Now he goes on to talk about, when to count your money that you won at the table, but that's not what I want you to focus on today. Instead, focus on those words. You have to know when to walk away and know when to run. So that the logical jump in my mind then this song led to a game show that I watch almost daily while I'm eating my lunch. And it's on the Game Show Network. They just show old shows all the time. It's called Deal or No Deal. How many of y'all seen Deal or No Deal? All right, just a few of you. Okay, so Deal or No Deal ran from about 2005 to 2009 on NBC. And then they had to come back in 2018 on CNBC. And the basic idea is that there's 26 briefcases with various amounts, and they range from a penny all the way up to $1 million. And the idea is that the contestant picks a case, and then they have to open all the rest of the cases to find out what's inside their case. At a certain point, the banker then offers them a deal based on the amounts left on the board, and you have to decide to take the deal or to continue on opening cases. Well, when they came back in 2018, they added the counter offer, which I've always wanted to do, and then they brought it back. I was like, hey, that's my idea. That's mine, right? But they added the counter offer where the contestant can send a counter offer back to the banker, and if the banker accepts that offer, that's great. But if the banker declines, then it goes as a no deal, and they have to open whatever number of cases they have to open. Ultimately, they wind up with whatever's in their case or going home with the bank offer. I tell you, I've seen people win the $1 million, and I've seen people win $1 on the show. It's just very exciting to watch. But one of the things that the host, Howie Mandel, would always say is that this show is about guts and timing. Do you have the guts to go on? Is now the time to continue or walk away? And then he would look them right in their eye and he would ask them that question: deal or no deal? Deal or no deal? Well, in the clip that I'm about to show you, Courtney Schlad has had a good game. It's now at the point where she only has to open one case from here on out. The banker has offered her $342,000. And she turned it down. Her next case, she opens up $300,000. And Courtney now waits for her offer. Let's see what happens. I love that part. I love that part. The music's building. The uncertainty of the choice that you just made feels like 100 pounds just resting on your shoulders. There's that lump in your throat that just won't seem to go away. You seem to be sweating from every pore on your body. Everyone is screaming at you to make the right decision, whatever that may be. I mean, it's intense, right? After all, Howie said, this is the tipping point. She still has a chance for $1 million. But she could also walk away with just $100 if her counteroffer is declined. Was the timing right to do that? Should she have walked away, or should she have run with the last offer? I mean, such a big decision. Who do you listen to? Your gut? A gambler on an old train? I couldn't even imagine being in her spot. Well, today we continue on in the life of Jacob. And Jacob is the grandson of Abraham and son to Isaac. And as he begins to weigh his options, and he makes a huge decision in his life. And he has some of the same questions. Is this the tipping point for him? Is this the time to act? Should he walk away or should he run? And who's he going to listen to? Well, to understand the story that we're going to talk about today, let's remember where we're at, right? So Jacob, a.k.a. the trickster, he tricked his brother Esau out of his birthright and his blessing, of course, with the help of his mom. He runs for his life then to his uncle Laban's house, where he falls in love with Laban's youngest daughter, Rachel. And he makes a deal to marry her by working for 7 years for Laban. But on the wedding night, Laban pulls the old switcheroo. And Jacob winds up married to the oldest daughter, Leah, instead. But he really loves Rachel, so he makes another deal by working another 7 years to marry Rachel. Finally, they're married, and everything is great, and it's a happily ever after, and we shut the door, and the book is done, right? Not exactly, if you paid attention to Jeff's sermon last week. This is where the sister wives, right? Leah and Rachel, this is where they start to compete with each other. Leah feels unloved by Jacob, and so she gives him 4 sons. Rachel, who's not able to have kids, and blamed Jacob, who then in turn Jacob blamed God, takes matters into her own hands, reminiscent of her grandparents, right? And gives his servant to Jacob as a wife, and he has 2 sons with her. Well, Leah, not wanting to be outdone, gives her servant to Jacob as a wife, and he has 2 sons, with her. And after being barren for a while, Leah gets pregnant again due to the sharing of the erotic herbs, right? And for more on that, you can go to our website. You can watch the video from last week or just talk to Pastor Jeff about the erotic herbs, okay? But when all that happens, then she gives birth to another son and also a daughter. And then Rachel, who was unable to have kids, finally gives birth to a little boy. Now, trust me, there is some real drama in this dysfunctional family, so much so that it spills into today's passage as we get another look at an interaction between Jacob and Laban. Remember, Laban is his father-in-law. So at this point in Genesis 30, Jacob tells Laban that he wants to go back to his homeland and he wants to take his family with him. And Laban is concerned. Laban is concerned because he knows that God has blessed him because of Jacob, and he doesn't want to lose that. So in an attempt to get him to stay, he offers to finally pay him. Jacob has worked for him for at least 14 years at this point, almost 20 years. He finally offers to pay him. And listen to this interaction. It's recorded in Genesis 30, 29 through 34. It says this: Jacob said to him, "You know how I've worked for you and how well your livestock has done with me. While in your care, what little you have has multiplied a great deal. The Lord blessed you wherever I took your livestock. Now when will I be able to work for my own household too?" Laban said, what will I pay you? Jacob said, "Don't pay me anything. If you will do this for me, I will take care of your flocks again and keep a portion. I will go through the entire flock today, taking out all of the speckled and spotted sheep and all the black male lambs and all of the spotted and speckled female goats. That will be my price. And I will be completely honest with you when it comes to checking our agreement. Every female goat that with me that isn't speckled or spotted, and every male lamb with me that isn't black, will be considered stolen." And Laban said, "All right, let's do it." Right? It's all set. Jacob hit the deal button. But the goat banker, Laban, does something I've never seen on Deal or No Deal. And he changes the deal as he takes all of the negotiated goats and sheep out of the flock before Jacob gets back to the field. and sends them with his son on a 3-day journey away from the encampment. In fact, leaving Jacob with nothing. The trickster had been tricked again. You see, Laban could not let Jacob go with all the livestock. He felt that if he leaves, then the blessings leave. So Laban, he had to have more, and it didn't matter who got hurt in the process. He got accustomed to a certain way of life, and now all that was in jeopardy of going away. So once again, Jacob had to improvise, and he created a mating system with poplar, almond, and plane trees in front of the water troughs. So that as all the remaining white goats came to drink, they would mate, and their offspring would be striped, speckled, or spotted. Right? Now listen to me. I have no idea how that works. I don't know how you put a tree in front of a trough and it changes what happens in the mating process. I don't understand that. We have some goat herders in second service, or some goat breeders in second service. I'm going to ask them about that just to try to figure out if they know anything about it. But I have no clue how that works, right? None. But it worked. Somehow it worked. So Jacob took those goats, he separated them from Laban's herd, and he then bred the strongest of the goats for himself and the weaker of the goats for Laban. His system worked like a charm. And verse 43 tells us that the man Jacob became very, very rich. He owned large flocks, female and male servants, camels and donkeys. Now, I don't know where the camels and donkeys came from. I'm assuming from the trading of the goats, because I had no idea what kind of tree that you'd put in front of a trough for goats to give you camels and donkeys. I don't know. I don't know if that's possible, okay? But anyways, on with the story. See, journey in my mind is not always a safe spot, right? But finally, we can see that Jacob had reached his tipping point. It seems that after 20 years of service to Laban, Jacob had finally had enough. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably asking, what took so long? I mean, why is he still there? He was deceived about his wives. Livestock was hidden from him. His pay had changed 10 times. And now we see in the beginning of chapter 31 that his in-laws are starting to turn on him. His brother-in-laws are talking behind his back about how he's stealing from their dad. And even Laban's affections for Jacob begin to grow cold. Jacob had reached his tipping point. And that's when in verse 3 we read this. It says, "Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your ancestors and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Hear that one more time. The Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your ancestors and to your relatives, and I will be with you. Now, I just want to hit the pause button on the story for just a minute and discuss a few things that we've seen in the story thus far. We see that Jacob is faced with the decision what to do. Timing is crucially important. Go or stay? What's the best, right thing to do? See, this question not only challenged Jacob, but it's also challenged humanity for all time. What is the best, right thing to do? See, what we do know for Jacob is that the decision that he makes on this day will determine the stories that are told in the future. And what stories would those be? Would he be the one who almost did what God had promised? Or would the stories be about the one who helped fulfill the promises of God? What about you? What about me? We face decisions on a daily basis, maybe not as intense as a family at war, right? But decisions that could define us and impact our life story. So ask yourself that question. What will the stories told about me be? Will the stories be about how you went to church and you lived a good life? Or will they be about how you followed the Lord's call in your life? You did what God asked of you no matter what the cost. You see, the question is still there. What do we do? How do we know what is the best right thing? You see, church, I believe that the only way that we can know what the best right thing is by knowing God personally and seeking God's plan. You see, I know that for us, God's plan starts with Jesus. God planned for Jesus to come and save the world. God planned for the church, you and me, not this building, but for you and me to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. God planned for our salvation, but God also planned for you to live a particular way. And that's why we've been given the Scriptures, to guide us, to teach us, to correct us even, and to bless us. You see, I am a firm believer that God has a plan for your life. It includes Jesus as your Lord and Savior. It includes you living a holy life. It includes you claiming your part in the Great Commission to go and make disciples of Jesus to the ends of the earth. And that starts right here in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. See, that's the general will of God, but specifically for you to discern something to be the will of God. Let me ask you, is it a definite conviction in your heart that God desires you to take, or a certain course, or to do a certain thing? Or could it be a passing interest or a desire? Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm the worst at that. And if you don't believe me, stop by my house and see the half-finished playhouse in the backyard. By the way, if anybody wants to help finish it, just let me know after church, okay? You see, I could be doing something vitally important, and out of nowhere, squirrel. I see something shiny. That must be the Lord, right? And I'm tempted to follow it. You see, I've learned that my tendency is to be drawn away. And so now I try my best to practice Isaiah 40:31, Psalm 27:14, Isaiah 30:18, Lamentations 3:25, and James 5:7 and 8. You all know what all those have in common, right? You don't? They all tell us to wait upon the Lord as God speaks. Wait upon the Lord. See, if we're going to figure out what is the best right thing to do, then we need to listen to God's voice. So then the next obvious question is, how does God speak to us? For Jacob, as we've seen, God spoke in visions and dreams. And for us, it could be different. How does God speak to us when what we are needing is confirmation that our desires and our opportunities are leading us in the way that God would have us to go? So I think that God's voice can come from the very Word of God. It can come from the Bible. That's why it's so important that we spend time daily in God's love letter to us. God's voice can also come from the Holy Spirit. That's why it's important for us to daily spend time in constant prayer. God's voice can also come to us from the knowledge of someone else. This is why it's important to be a part of community of believers like here at church and being in small groups. God's voice can also come to us through our trials. And this is why it's important to look for God in everything that we experience and listen for what God might be telling us through it. You see, to hear God's voice, we have to keep the lines of communication open. When we really listen for God's voice, we realize also that we're working on God's timeline, which is normally not the same as our timeline, right? I'll tell you, that's especially true for me. I told you all the story before, how my dad used to call me Mr. Instant Gratification, right? If I wanted it, I wanted it now. You see, family, it's okay to wait upon the Lord. But we need to just make sure that we're waiting on the Lord and not procrastinating to do what God is leading us to do. I'll tell you, that's exactly what we see from Jacob. No procrastination, just action, right? God speaks and He does it. Remember, we left off in the story where God told him to pack it all up and to head home. And Jacob had a decision to make. Jacob saw everything that was happening around him, and he kept the lines of communication with God open. And so therefore he listened when God spoke. And when the time came, he said, you know what, deal. He hit the button, and he called his family in from the fields, and they had a talk. So let's pick up the story in verse 4 of Genesis 31. So Jacob sent for Rachel and Leah and summoned them into the field where his flock was. He said to them then, I am aware that your father no longer likes me as much as he used to, but my father's God has been with me. You know that I worked for your father as hard as I could, but your father cheated me and changed my payment 10 times, yet God didn't let him harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your payment, the whole flock gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the striped ones will be your payment, the whole flock gave birth to striped ones. God took away your father's livestock and gave them to me. When the flocks were mating, I looked up and I saw in a dream that the male goats and mounted the flocks were striped, speckled, and spotted. In the dream, God's messenger said to me, Jacob, and I said, I'm here. He said, look up and watch all the striped, speckled, and spotted male goats mounting the flocks. I've seen everything that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a sacred pillar and where you made a solemn promise to me. Now get up, leave this country, and go back to the land of your relatives. Rachel and Leah, they finally agreed on something here. They answered him, is there any share or inheritance left for us in our father's household? Does he think of us as foreigners since he sold us and has even used up all the payment that he received for us? All of the wealth God took from our father belongs to us and our children. Now do everything God told you to do. So Jacob got up, put his sons and wives on the camels, and set out with all of his livestock and all of his possessions that he had acquired in Paddan Aram in order to return to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Jacob and his wives are convinced that leaving is the best and right decision. And so Jacob sets off for his homeland with his wages, the speckled, striped, and spotted goats, and the black male goats, and everything else that he had acquired in the service of Laban. But there was one problem. There was one problem. You see, Jacob and his family did not say goodbye to the in-laws. Now, I tell you, I can't leave my in-laws' house without saying goodbye to them. I can't. My mother-in-law will literally come outside and say, hey, goodbye, right? She'll do that. But they just didn't say goodbye. And the other problem was that Rachel decided, hey, this is the best time to take one of my father's idols with me. And so she takes an idol. They just took off and they headed to the mountains of Gilead. Now, I imagine that a group that size might be slow going. So it's no surprise that even with a 3-day head start, Laban catches up with them after he finds out that they vanished. But now, here comes the showdown, right? I mean, the craziest in-law fight of all time is about to take place. Well, not exactly. You see, God now speaks directly to Laban and turns what could be a battle into a conversation that should have happened before Jacob even left. So let's finish our story by picking up in Genesis 31:24. It says, that night God appeared to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream and said, be careful and do not say anything hastily to Jacob one way or the other. Laban reached Jacob after Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, so Laban and his brothers also pitched theirs in the mountains of Gilead. Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? Why have you deceived me and taken off with my daughters as if they are prisoners of war? I love that. Why have you deceived me? That's their relationship, right? Why did you leave secretly, deceiving me yet again, and not letting me know? I would have sent you off with a celebration with songs and tambourines and harps, but you didn't even let me kiss my sons and my daughters goodbye. And now you've acted like a fool, and I have the power to punish you. However, your father's God told me yesterday, be careful, and don't say anything hastily to Jacob one way or the other. You've rushed off now because you've missed your father's household so much. But now we get to the real problem. But why did you steal my gods? And now we see why Jacob just took off here in verse 31. Jacob responded to Laban, I was afraid. I was afraid, and I convinced myself that you would take your daughters away from me. But whoever you find with your divine images, they won't live. Identify whatever I have that is yours in front of your brothers and take it. Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen him. Remember, Rachel's his favorite, right? Rachel's the one that he loves the most. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and her 2 servants' tents and didn't find them. And so he left Leah's tent and he went into Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the divine image and put them in the camel's saddlebag and saddled them. And Laban felt around the whole tent but couldn't find them. And Rachel said to her father, Sir, don't be angry with me because I can't get up for you. I'm having my period. That was a moment of uncleanliness right there. He searched but couldn't find the divine image. Jacob was angry and he complained to Laban, what have I done wrong and what's my crime that you have tracked me down like this? You felt through all of my baggage and what have you found from your household's belonging? Put them in front of your relatives and let them decide between us. For these 20 years I've been with you. Your female sheep and goats haven't miscarried. I haven't eaten your flock's rams. When animals were killed, I didn't bring them to you, but I took the loss myself. You demanded compensation from me for my animals poached for any animal poached during the day or night. The dry heat consumed me during the day and the frost at night. I couldn't sleep. And now I've spent 20 years in your household, worked for 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock. And you've changed my pay 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the awesome one of Isaac, I love that. The awesome one of Isaac. I love that right there. But if the awesome one of Isaac hadn't been with me, you'd have no doubt sent me away without anything. God saw my harsh treatment and my hard work and reprimanded you yesterday. Laban responded and told Jacob, the daughters are my daughters. The children are my children. and the flocks are my flocks. Everything you see is mine. But what can I now do about my daughters and their sons? Come, let's make a treaty, you and me, and let something be our witness. And so Jacob took a stone and he set it up as a secret pillar. And he said to his relatives, gather stones. So they took stones, made a mount, and they ate there near the mount. Laban called it Jegar Sarhatuta. I can't get that right. I've tried numerous times. But Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, this mound is our witness today. And therefore he too named it Gilead. He also named it Mitzvah, because he said, the Lord will observe both of us when we are separated from each other. If you treat my daughters badly, and if you marry other women, though we aren't there, know that God observed our witness. Laban said to Jacob, here is this mound, and here is the sacred pillar that I've set up for us. This mound and sacred pillar are witnesses that I won't travel beyond this mound, and that you won't travel beyond this mound and this pillar to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor will keep order between us. And so Jacob gave his word in the name of the awesome one of his father Isaac. I love that still. Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his relatives to a meal. They ate together and spent the night on the mountain. Laban got up early, and the next morning he kissed his sons and daughters, blessed them, and left to go back to his own place. And that ends our story for this Sunday. Tune in next week when Pastor Jeff tells us about Jacob going back to face his angry brother Esau, right? I tell you, it almost seems like the life of Jacob is like a daytime soap opera. It really does. But even within this story, there is so much that's happening, right? I mean, Jacob is tricked out of a deal once again. He has a dream from God on how to make speckled, striped, and spotted goats by putting certain trees in front of water troughs. The gossip mill is running wild, and the in-laws are starting to turn on him. So God tells him to go home, and his wives agree. They pack up everything. Rachel steals her father's idol, which is kind of interesting, right? Pastor Jeff and I were talking about this. It's something to kind of note. Because if you remember back a few stories, Rebekah was very intent that Jacob should not marry the women from around their area because it might dilute his faith, right? But yet Laban has idols of other gods, and Rachel feels she has to take one with her. Okay. Kind of defeats that whole purpose of sending Jacob off in the first place, right? Anyway, Jacob and his family and the flocks, they just leave. Laban chases them down for a battle that never happens. God talks to Laban. Laban and Jacob make a treaty, and they both go their separate ways. I could have told you just that and saved 20 minutes, right? But the wisdom, the life lesson in this story for us, it's in the details. It's in the details. See, church, there was so much working against Jacob, but yet he prospered. However, he knew that Padam Aram was not his home, and so he waited for confirmation from the Lord that this was the time to go and the time to do the best right thing. And the only reason that he knew that was because he sought the will of the Lord and was ready to receive the word from God when God spoke. You see, I think that's the lesson for us today as well. You see, we can get caught up in all the extras of life, and we can miss the essentials. We can listen to the voices inside of our head and from others, and we miss the voice that matters the most. We can play deal or no deal with every aspect of our lives and never say deal to the one deal that will completely change our lives and the lives of those around us. You see, there's going to come a time where we have to make a decision. Maybe for you today, that is to give your life to God for the first time, to trust in God's plan. Maybe for you, it's a new job opportunity, or maybe it's when it's time to make a major life change. But whatever it is, we will all have to make a decision. And to make the best, right decision, we need to wait and listen for the voice of the Lord. Are we going to make mistakes along the way? You betcha. But by remaining correctable and teachable, God can get us back in line with His plan for us. So let me leave you with one more scripture that comes as a prayer from the Apostle Paul. You can find this in Philippians 1, 9 through 11. Paul said this is his prayer for the Philippian church. This is my prayer, that your love might become even more and more rich with knowledge and all kinds of insight. I pray this so that you will be able to decide what really matters, so you will be sincere and blameless on the day of Christ. I pray that you then will be filled with the fruit of the righteous, which comes from Jesus Christ, in order to give glory and praise to God. So family, take this with you as you leave today, knowing God is the key. God is the key to knowing what is the best and right thing to do. Let us pray.